This is the issue, and I am the ghetto man. Today's issue, slavery. We'll be right back. When our country was established, the whole world, the whole known world at that time, was involved in some form of slavery. Either it was an indentured servitude, where somebody worked for somebody for a period of years and then was released into freedom, or they just outright owned them. The thing that I think that we tend to forget when we're dealing with the subject of slavery is that we have to go back to when the colonies were established, and then finally when our country revolted against the King of England and became a nation. We have to understand that slavery, and whether it was right or wrong, whether we feel it was right or wrong right now, slavery was normal. And it was not just normal in the colonies, and it wasn't just normal in the United States. It was normal throughout the known world at that time. People owned other people. I know that sounds bizarre, but that's what was going on. People owned other people. Now, we all know that that's not right. Nobody should own another person. But everybody did. So what we're talking about here is the common law, the common customs and practices of the people of that time. And that means we can go to West Africa. You'll find out that the West African people had slaves. They capture people from other tribes and they would enslave them. We know that those people that captured other people and enslaved them actually sold them as property to slave merchants, which were white, but they were also of other colors as well. We forget that this was something that everybody was doing. It wasn't like everybody out there says, yeah, you can own another person. That's the way it is. And so you have to look at our history. You have to look back at slavery and say, at that time, slavery was everywhere. It wasn't unique to the Americas. It wasn't unique to the colonies. It wasn't unique to the United States of America when it became a nation. Slavery was everywhere. Slavery was everywhere. And it's funny because when we take back and we take into consideration that everybody owned slaves, not everybody, but there were people who owned slaves, that was not something that was, at that time, was considered anything evil or wrong. It was just something that everybody did, and they've been doing it for so long that nobody ever questioned it. Now, it's funny because we sit here and we say, the country, the slave owners were evil, white, rich people. Well, I'm not saying there weren't evil, white, rich people that had slaves, but it wasn't all about white people. In fact, I've mentioned this on other videos many times, that the first legal, now when I say legal, it's different than the first slave owner, but the first legal slave owner in our country was a black man. His name was Anthony Johnson. Okay, Anthony Johnson was of Angolan descent. And he attained his freedom in the early part of the 17th century. and he got his freedom in the colony of Virginia. Now, we go back. Johnson was originally captured in Angola by an enemy tribe. Okay, we were just talking about that. He was later sold to Arab slave traders. And we know Arabs are dark-skinned people too. And not that I'm getting into color skins. Color skin has nothing to do with this. I'm just trying to make a point that slavery was such a wide-known thing that it wasn't just something that was unique to the European Caucasian. Now, see, I'm of Italian descent. As far as I know, none of my ancestors owned anybody. They were poor. They could barely take care of themselves, let alone own and be able to feed and house and take care of some sort of a servant. Anyway, this guy Anthony Johnson was sold to Arab slave traders, and later he was sold to a merchant as an indentured servant. Now, an indentured servant is different than somebody who's a slavery. They basically have a contract that they're going to work for somebody for a certain period of time, and then after that period of time, let's say 7 years, then they're freed and they're free to go and as any other person that would be free in this country. Okay, so people that were enslaved, whether it be indentured servitude or regular slaves, could and were released into freedom. Okay, Antonio, or what his name was at this time, in 1635, Antonio and his wife gained their freedom. At that point, Antonio changed his name to Anthony Johnson. 16 years later, Anthony Johnson now owns 250 acres. But what is interesting is he also owns the services of 4 white people and 1 black servant. And all these people were indentured indentured servants. Now, there was the one black indentured servant. His name was John, and I think it's pronounced Caesar, but it's spelled Casor. Now, he was a black indentured servant. And what he did is he demanded that this Anthony Johnson would release him. He claimed that his 7 years of indenture had been completed. And Johnson said that he was unaware of any indenture. Okay, so it was Johnson's position that Caesar, whatever his name was his servant for life. Johnson's slave. Now, I'm going to get into the details of the case right now, and maybe later on what we'll do is we'll go through the entire case. But right now, I just want to touch the slavery thing, and I want to make some important points here because right now, the left and the rhinos in the Republican Party, but especially the left right now, is really trying to push for this racist removal of all of the Confederate statues. But before we go there, I'd just like to make a point that when it comes to slavery, that it isn't all about, black slavery. That it was slaves in black. There were white people in black. That the first slaves in this country were the Irish. Okay, and then later on, anybody could become a slave. It didn't necessarily mean that it was one particular race. Although now that's all we talk about is the black race. And I'm not saying that those people didn't go through hell, okay? Because I'm not saying that. I just want to make a point here so that we take a look at this issue using a little reason, logic, and common sense instead of flying off the handle with some emotional tempest, that we're going to go ahead and just tear down everything of our history, and somehow that's going to correct a problem that really is no problem at all. At least not now. So anyway, in a nutshell, Anthony Johnson took the issue to court, and the court ruled that John Caesar was Johnson's property. So Caesar became the first African American in the 13 colonies to be a slave for life. So why are we fighting our slave or fighting over our slave history? Because as far as I know, we ended slavery, remember? Shouldn't we be celebrating the fact that slavery ended in this country? It was everywhere before. Everywhere, all over the known world. Everybody owned slaves. It was just common customs and practices to own people. But when it comes to the United States, we ended that. And I repeat myself, but we should be celebrating that. Now, I want to just back up for a moment here. There's a Supreme Court case, and it came out of New York, I believe, and it's a very old case. It was back when John Marshall was the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. And as we all know, his personality, he was a Titanic of a personality. The case was called the My McQueen case. And basically what it was a case where this lady, My McQueen, who's a black person who was enslaved, claimed that somewhere along the line, one of her ancestors had been freed, and therefore that freedom extends down to her. Well, it was taken to court. And to kind of make a long story short, John Marshall, I got to remember, what we're talking about is what was going on during the time. Slavery was legal. Slavery was being done throughout the colonies, throughout Europe, and down in Africa. It's the Middle East, which still has slavery today. What we were dealing with is a property interest here. So John Marshall kind of, it sounds ridiculous today, but he said that what we're dealing with here is a great property right. This My McQueen was property. And with all property, the owner, that's an extension of their person. John Marshall said that My McQueen couldn't prove her case. Yeah, she didn't have any actual connection from this particular freed slave up to her point. So anyway, the court ruled that the My McQueen was still a slave. I know it sounds horrible, and I'm not trying to justify that and to say that was a right thing, but that's exactly what took place in the court case. The court only ruled that way because we're talking about a common custom and practice, and that was owning human beings. And I can't stress how horrible that is. The whole idea of owning another human being just doesn't even enter into my persona. I can't fathom that, but that's a fact. So what we did in this country is we ended that. We got rid of slavery. And that should be the point that everybody should be looking at. Shouldn't be going back saying, well, these people that were involved in the Civil War, well, they owned slaves, or the founders owned slaves, and blah, blah, blah. Oh, get over it. Everybody owned fucking slaves, including black people. The argument doesn't exist. Slavery was done away with. Now, there are two people in recent history, that I really admire. I admire them because of their intestinal fortitude and the fact that they would look these racist assholes, the socialists, the neo-Nazis, the National Socialists, and then, of course, the KKK, which is the Democratic Party, white supremacists, and you got Black Lives Matter, which are the black supremacists, and you got the La Raza, they are the brown supremacists. We've got all these supremacist groups that are fighting each other. It's really funny. They're all on the left side of the issue here. But the two people that I have greatest admiration for in this country when it comes to this subject is Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King. Rosa Parks, she understood that she was a citizen of the United States, and she understood that she had a right, as every other citizen in this country, to freely move around, especially when it comes to public transportation in this case. And they had a law down there that when the bus was full and a white person came on the bus, that a black person had to give up their seat for that white person. And, of course, Rosa Parks, the famous thing is she didn't want to give up her seat, and they arrested her, and they took her to court. She lost. Then she took it up on appeal, and finally the United States Supreme Court says, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your color is. If you're free, you're free. And you can't sit here and have communities, set up laws that prohibit other people based upon their race, their religion, or sexual orientation, or whatever the case may be. You can't turn around and tell these people that they have to give up something that they have a right to. In this case, it was the seat on the bus. Okay, like I said, the case is a benchmark case, and it proved to everybody that there is no distinction between color in the United States. We ended slavery. Now, all of the problems that they were having in the South, they're all related to the Democratic Party directly. Even the man that shot Abraham Lincoln, Booth, he was a Democrat. And I did a show on this, and I showed how many people that were Democrats, that are involved in all this. Anyway, that Rosa Parks stood up for her rights, and she was able to take it to court, and at least, as far as law is concerned, we ended this segregation nonsense. Although it's all being resurrected again right now, and it's being used against the white people, the black people, brown people. It's just being resurrected. And the second person that I have great admiration for, and still do, and who, if was here today, wouldn't be putting up with any of this Black Lives Matter crap, this white supremacy crap, KKK crap, all this garbage. He would not have put up with this. He was a man of peace. Martin Luther King. And the one of the quotes that I think that sticks in my head, and I mean it really is important, is when he said, "I have a dream," he says, "that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." Martin Luther King would not have supported Black Lives Matter. They're violent, just like the KKK. And this is not a reversed prejudicial thing. This is just straight, outright, unadulterated, raw prejudice on all sides. I don't care who you are. All lives matter. All lives matter. And if they don't, then how are we ever going to solve this problem of racial division, especially when the left, the Democratic Party, and all of its anti-American extremism is sitting here and race baiting this? The alternate left and the alternate right are all from the left. It's just the two sides of the same coin, which I've said in other videos. And this nonsense has got to stop, because slavery was ended. We didn't create it. The United States didn't create it. It was something that was going on. I think that the United Kingdom ended slavery just before we did, but we ended slavery. And that should be the end of the story here. Martin Luther King would not have put up with any of this violent actions that are taking place right now. And I would stand behind the man right now if he were alive. You look at what he did. He used civil disobedience. He dealt with peaceful protest. Peaceful protest. And by doing the peaceful protest, he was able to expose the left for how evil they were. I mean, I remember because I was a teenager in the '60s, and I remember watching this on TV. I mean, they were the people in down south were sicking dogs on people. They were just marching, joined together, peaceful. We're not causing any problems. Not doing what Black Lives Matter does, or KKK, or the neo-Nazis does. These leftist idiots. They walked down the street peacefully. And when they did that, they were attacked. They were attacked with clubs. They were arrested. They were shot with water hoses. I mean, high-powered water hoses that would knock a man down. I watched this. Dogs biting people. It was the most disgusting display of evil that I can remember from a child, is watching the '60s civil rights movement move into play. Dr. Martin Luther King, God bless him, lost his life to prove how ridiculous this racial nonsense is. And look what we're doing today. Look what we're doing today. We're resurrecting all this. We're trying to blame it all on the founding fathers, whether they be of the Civil War or of the North or part of the Union. They're sitting here saying, these people were evil people. They owned slaves. No shit. Everybody owned slaves. Slavery was legal. Slavery was legal. So why in the world would you sit there and say just these people that were involved in it, somehow they're bad people when everybody was doing it and it didn't matter what color you were? This has got to stop. We ended slavery in this country, and that is the end of the story. Now, this prejudice nonsense that's going on in the left, who controls all of these racist assholes, they're stirring up trouble. They're trying to stir up enough trouble that they can get a civil war going and get people fighting for each other, fighting with each other over their skin color. Okay, you might say, well, yeah, the whites have had more privilege. Well, that's a bunch of bullshit too. And I mean, that's bullshit in my time. It may have been a problem when they were dealing with the racism down in the South. But once that was all put aside, and it was, people understood that, there is no class of people that are better than another based on something as ridiculous as skin color. Now, I originally came from Southern California. And when I was actually born in Hollywood, called Hollywood. So I've seen a lot of strange stuff in my time, and people exercising their rights of individuality to the point that it was kind of bizarre to me. But as long as they weren't violating somebody else's life, liberty, or property, I really didn't care. So you do your thing, and if that makes you happy, I have no problem with that. Just go for it. But don't turn around and tell me that I have to accept your thing, and I have to become your thing, and I have to accept everything that you're doing. I don't have to accept what you're doing. I got my own life. I got my own ideas, and I can choose who I want to associate with, which is going to bring me to another subject coming up, and I'm going to deal with racism versus racial, or racial versus racism. There's a big difference between the two, and it's important that we understand that, because if we don't, we could destroy the diversity of the various different cultures uh, unintentionally. Okay? And I'm not going to get into that right now. It's a very interesting subject, and I think that you'll enjoy it because it's something that I've thought about for many, many, many years. Anyway, I'm going to tell you a little story about a man named Daryl. Now, years ago, when I lived in Southern California, I was involved in bodybuilding, and was actually, an avid competitor in bodybuilding. And of course, the best way to train, you can train by yourself, but the best way to train is to have a training partner, someone who's going to push you and work with you and, spot you, and making sure that when you're handling heavy weights, that when you get to the point where you're approaching muscle failure, that they're there to make sure you don't hurt yourself, but you're able to push that last rep out so you get the most benefit from it. Well, anyway, I was a businessman and Daryl was a businessman. And not that it matters, because it doesn't matter to me and it shouldn't matter to anybody, but Daryl was black. And I'm only bringing it up to make a point. Most of the time, I wouldn't even bring up a person's color, because if I mention a friend, I mention their name, and that's that. But I'm going to make a point here. Now, Daryl and Daryl's family were extremely wealthy. And so Daryl and I used to talk. We were talking about business and various different strategies, how to make money and, where your market is and that sort of thing. I'm not going to get into the details, but the thing is that Daryl was a black guy, and he lived in a black community. Not that he couldn't live anywhere else, but that's where he happened to live. But him and his family were able to make enormous amounts of money because they had a string of restaurants. Daryl was the first person that I ever met, actually the last person I ever met or knew, that owned a stainless steel brushed DeLorean. I mean, I've ridden in a DeLorean. Now, we talked about, why is it that there's such a problem between, these people living in poor communities and having nothing, and versus what, people that are successful, as Daryl was, or as I was at the time, for that matter. And we also talked about things like jobs versus opportunity. See, the system is designed, it's set up for one thing, and you know it because you hear it every day. You got to get a good high school education, because if you don't get your diploma, you can't get a good job. Then you got to go to college, and you got to get this degree, that degree, and then you get your master's, and then finally you get your PhD in order to get a good job. See, Daryl and I both understood that, opportunity was far greater than having a job. And it didn't matter what color you were. It was up here in your head. It was how you perceived the situation. To Daryl, there was nothing but opportunity that he could see in the communities where he could excel and end up owning a lot of real estate, a lot of restaurants, and then be able to drive around in a stainless steel brushed DeLorean. Daryl didn't feel this prejudice that Black Lives Matter feels, and the KKK and the rest of these things. Why? Because he understood that he was in control of his destiny, and that he didn't have to put himself in a position where anybody, regardless of your color, could discriminate. He's the boss, for crying out loud. And I think that when we take a look at something like this, we start to realize how important it is to understand that there is no issue with slavery anymore, unless you want to take a look at the banking system, because the borrower is always servant to the lender. That we do have financial slavery, but we're all involved in it, man. And they make sure that everybody is servant to the banks, and they don't care what color you are. And you're just as much a slave as that person that was under indentured servitude or was owned by a slave owner. I think about Daryl a lot. It was a lot of years ago because he actually was a great influence upon me as a businessman because I was able to understand things that deal with how to make money and understanding that people have prejudice. You can use those prejudice to your advantage if you're a business person. And I'm going to talk more about this when we get into the difference between racist and racial. But right now, with all the climate that we have, this climate of hate, and it's all based upon, it's race baiting, it's race against race, which is really it's really nonsense. And I can't believe people are falling into this bullshit again, because I would surely be disappointed if everything that Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, and even Mahatma Gandhi. I believe that Martin Luther King, was a great admirer of Mahatma Gandhi because he was able to get the British out of India by just civil disobedience. And the reason why they left is because they did peaceful civil disobedience. They just wouldn't obey these totalitarian assholes. And when they started to become the tyrants they do, just like they did in the 60s, with attacking the black people and with water hoses and everything else, when the world saw that behavior, that hate, started to turn things around. And why? Because Martin Luther King, like Mahatma Gandhi, made sure that they put themselves in a position where nobody could point a finger at them as being the ones that were causing the problems, or the agitators, or the haters. It was all exposed because as they marched down the streets peacefully, those that hated attacked them. So it was real easy to see where the problem was. The Democrats have never supported the Civil Rights Act. Never. And don't let them try to tell you they have. It's bullshit. They're trying to switch everything around so that they can make it look like they're the good guys when they're the ones causing all this problem. Whether you're white, whether you're brown, I don't care what color. If you are rainbow color, I could care less. You can have a right to believe what you want to believe. And you can have a right to believe that you're white and you're better than everybody else. You have a right to believe you're black and you're better than everybody else. But what you don't have a right to do is to violate somebody else's life, liberty, or property to prove your point. Nobody has that right. And since the left controls all of these factions, they control all of them. They control Acorn. They control La Raza. They control the white supremacists, the neo-fascist Nazis, the leftists. They support the KKK. They're the ones that created it, for crying out loud. They support Black Lives Matter. And if you take a look at all these things, these are all leftist outfits, and their only purpose is to just sit there and stir up nothing but trouble. And they're trying to bring this racial stuff up. Race baiting, not racial, racist stuff. And they're trying to get everybody to take sides and hate each other. Well, I don't believe the majority of the Americans are going to even fall for this crap. I think it's going to backfire them on. I think the Democratic Party is committing political suicide, and good for that, because the sooner we get rid of them, the better. Then we can start on the Republican Party and clean that shit up. We ended slavery. We got rid of it. Nobody that owned slaves in this country, nobody. They were all doing what was the common customs and practices of the day, which was bullshit, which we were smart enough through the Emancipation Proclamation to end it. We ended it. It's over. Get over it. Stop trying to resurrect a dead, rotting corpse. Nobody has to put up with people that are out here claiming that their race is better than some other race. It's a leftist movement. If the left wants to destroy this country, and if they can get people fighting with each other over something as ridiculous as their skin color, that's exactly what they're going to do. Anyway, that was what I wanted to talk about when it comes to slavery, because I am sick of this nonsense. I'm sick of having to talk this over and over and over and over and over again, to sit here and say, can't you see that this is a setup? Can't you see that these people that are in control, the left, the Democratic Party, can't you see that what they want to do is bust this country completely wide open and turn it into a police state tyranny second to nothing in the history of this planet? With that, I'm going to say what I say at the end of all of my shows. If you're politically correct, then you're legally wrong. And if you're not part of the solution, then you are the problem. I am the Ghetto Man. Thank you for watching.
Sitting in your little corporate world, you can't tell me how to live my life. Do you think I'm just your squirrel? No, you can't keep me down. I won't let you jerk me around. No, you can't keep me. No, you can't keep me. No, you can't keep me. You can't keep me down. I speak for freedom to live my life. Believe me, you will never, never take me down. No, I'll be here when your world is turned to dust. You'll be forgotten and I'll be around. No, you can't keep me down. I won't let you jerk me around. No, no, you can't keep me. No, you can't keep me. No, you can't keep me. You can't keep me down. All you got. You hear what I'm talking about? Can't keep me. No, you can't keep me down. I won't let you jerk me around. No, you can't keep me. No, you can't keep me. No, you can't keep me. You can't keep me down. Lay down your life for a political asylum. Young men's blood is being spilled. It's blood money for wealth, power, and rule. You're the beast pawn in a bloodlust never to be feared. No, you can't keep me down. I won't let when the evil of war is over, to carry on a universal peace. It's people like us who follow a different drummer. Until that time, we will watch you bleed. You can't keep me down. I won't let you judge me around.